The kitchen was a storm of noise posts clanging, knives chopping, and Chef Marco's voice booming like thunder. His face was red, his chef's hat tilted, and his eyes blazed with fury. In the middle of the fancy restaurant, La Belle Étoile, a woman stood frozen. She wore a plain gray dress, her brown hair tied in a messy bun, and her hands trembled. Her name was Clara. Everyone thought she was just a shy dishwasher, someone who scrubbed pots and stayed out of the way. But now, Chef Marco was pointing a ladle at her like it was a sword. "You!" he shouted, his voice echoing across the shiny kitchen. "You think you can ruin my night? My perfect dish? You're going to fix this, or I'll fire you right now." The other cook stopped, staring. Waiters peeked through the door. Clara's eyes widened, her heart pounding like a drum. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. It was the biggest night of the year at La Belle Étoile. A famous food critic, Madame Leclerc, was in the dining room, waiting for the restaurant's signature dish. Soufflé d'or, a golden, fluffy masterpiece so tricky to make that even skilled chefs messed it up. But tonight, disaster struck. The head sous chef, Pierre, had burned the soufflé. Black smoke curled from the oven, and the whole kitchen smelled like failure. Chef Marco was losing his mind. "Pierre, you idiot!" Marco had screamed earlier, throwing a spatula across the room. "You've ruined us. Get out!" Pierre, pale and shaking, had run out the back door, leaving the kitchen in chaos. Now Marco needed someone to make the soufflé d'orange fast. Madame Leclerc was waiting, her pen ready to write a review that could make or break the restaurant. Marco's eyes landed on Clara, the quiet dishwasher who never spoke unless spoken to. "You're cooking the soufflé," Marco growled, grabbing Clara's arm and pulling her to the stove. "Don't just stand there like a scared mouse. Move!" Clara's face went white. "Me?" she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm just a dishwasher. I don't know how to cook." The other cooks snickered. "Clara? Cooking?" one whispered. "She'll burn the place down." Another laughed. "She probably doesn't even know what a soufflé is." But Marco wasn't laughing. His restaurant was on the line and he was desperate. "You'll cook it or you're out of a job," he roared, shoving a recipe card into her hands. The card was covered in fancy words: bechamel, emulsion, chiffonade. Clara stared at it, her hands shaking so hard the card fluttered like a leaf. The kitchen clock ticked loudly. Madame Leclerc was waiting. If the soufflé wasn't perfect, the restaurant could lose its reputation. Clara looked around, her eyes wide with panic. Everyone was watching, waiting for her to fail. Marco crossed his arms, his face like a storm cloud. "Get to work," he barked. "Now!" Clara took a shaky step toward the counter. Her fingers brushed the cold steel of a mixing bowl. She looked at the ingredients eggs: flour, butter, a strange cheese she'd never seen before. Her heart raced. Could she do this? Should she do this? She wanted to run, to hide, to disappear. But something deep inside her stirred, like a spark in the dark. Her eyes flickered, just for a moment, with a secret no one in the kitchen knew. And then, the oven beeped, loud and sharp, snapping everyone's attention. Clara froze, her hand on an egg. The kitchen went silent. What would she do next? Build up the quiet dishwasher. Let's go back to the beginning, before the chaos, before the shouting, before Clara was dragged into the spotlight. It was early that morning, and La Belle Étoile was quiet. The restaurant was in a small town, but it was famous. People came from all over to eat Chef Marco's food. His dishes were like magic creamy soups that tasted like dreams, desserts that sparkled like jewels. Everyone said he was a genius, but he was also mean. He yelled at his cooks, threw spoons when he was mad, and fired people for tiny mistakes. Everyone was scared of him. Clara had worked at La Belle Etoile for 3 months. She was 32, but she looked younger, with soft brown eyes and a shy smile. She came to work every day in her plain gray dress, her hair in a bun, and she never said much. The other workers barely noticed her. She washed dishes, scrubbed pots, and cleaned the floors. When the cooks argued or laughed, Clara stayed quiet, her head down. No one knew much about her. She lived alone in a tiny apartment, and when people asked where she was from, she'd just say, "Oh, around." But there were hints, tiny clues, that Clara wasn't as simple as she seemed. Sometimes, when no one was looking, she'd watch the cooks. Her eyes would follow their hands as they chopped vegetables or stirred sauces. Once, a cook named Sophie caught Clara staring at a pot of soup. "What are you looking at?" Sophie asked, annoyed. Clara blushed and mumbled, "Nothing," before hurrying back to her dishes. Sophie rolled her eyes and said to another cook, "She's so weird." Clara didn't mind being invisible. She liked it. It was safe. But sometimes, when she was alone, scrubbing a pan, her fingers would move like they had a mind of their own. She'd hum a little song, and her hands would dance over the sink, quick and sure, like they knew something no one else did. That morning, the restaurant was buzzing with excitement. Madame Leclerc, the famous food critic, was coming. She wrote for a big magazine, and her reviews could make a restaurant famouser ruin it. Chef Marco was nervous, which made him even meaner than usual. "If anyone messes this up," he shouted at the morning meeting, "you're gone. This is our chance to shine." The cooks nodded, their faces pale. Clara stood in the back, her hands folded, listening quietly. Pierre, the head sous chef, was in charge of the souffle d'or. He was young and cocky, always bragging about his skills. "Don't worry, chef," he said with a grin. "I've got this. The souffle will be perfect." Marco glared at him. "It better be," he said. Clara watched from the corner, her eyes sharp for just a second before she looked down again. The day went on, and the kitchen got busier. Orders piled up, pans sizzled, and Marco's shouting got louder. Clara stayed at her sink, washing dishes, but she could feel the tension in the air. Something was going to go wrong. She didn't know how she knew, but she felt it, like a storm coming, pacing, highs and lows high. By late afternoon, the kitchen was a mess. Waiters ran in and out, carrying plates of food to the dining room. Madame Leclerc had arrived, and everyone was on edge. Clara heard whispers about how she once closed a restaurant with a single bad review, how she could tell if a dish was off by just one pinch of salt. The cooks were sweating, their hands shaking as they plated dishes. Marco was everywhere, yelling, "Faster! Perfect! Don't ruin this." Then came the disaster. Pierre, rushing to get the souffle in the oven, misread the recipe. He turned the heat too high. Clara, scrubbing a pot, saw him do it. She wanted to say something, but she bit her lip. "Stay quiet," she told herself. "Don't get involved." But when the oven started smoking, her stomach twisted. Pierre opened the door, and there it was, the souffle d'or, black and ruined. The kitchen went silent for a moment, then exploded. "You fool!" Marco screamed, throwing a spatula. It hit the wall with a clang. Pierre stammered, "I'm sorry, chef." But Marco wasn't listening. "Get out!" he roared. Pierre ran, leaving the kitchen in chaos. The other cooks whispered, panicked, "What do we do? Madame Leclerc is waiting." Marco's eyes darted around, wild, until they landed on Clara. Lo, Clara stood at her sink, her hands in soapy water, pretending not to notice. She wanted to disappear. She wasn't supposed to be part of this. She was just a dishwasher. But Marco stormed over, his face red. "You!" he shouted, pointing. "You're cooking the souffle!" Clara's heart stopped. She shook her head. No, chef, I can't, she said softly. I don't know how. Don't lie to me, Marco snapped. Everyone can crack an egg. You're doing it, or you're fired. The other cooks stared, some laughing, some confused. Clara felt their eyes on her, like needles. She wanted to run, but her feet wouldn't move. She looked at the recipe card Marco shoved at her, the words swimming in her vision. Her hands shook, but deep inside, that spark flickered again. She knew those words: bechamel, emulsion. She knew them better than anyone in this kitchen. Twist. As Clara stood there, the oven beeped again, loud and sharp. Everyone turned to look. Clara's hand was still on the egg, frozen. But her eyes weren't scared anymore. They were steady, focused, like a hunter's. She set the egg down, slow and careful. The other cooks didn't notice, but Marco did. His eyes narrowed. What are you waiting for? He growled. Clara didn't answer. She reached for a whisk, her fingers moving like they had a secret plan. And then the back door swung open with a bang. Pierre was back, his face pale and his eyes wild. Chef, he shouted. You have to let me try again. I can fix this. The kitchen froze. Marco turned, his face twisting with rage. Clara stood at the counter, the whisk in her hand, her heart pounding. What would happen now? The kitchen at La Belle Etoile was a pressure cooker, the air thick with the smell of sizzling duck and the weight of unspoken questions. Clara stood frozen, her heart pounding as Lily held the fallen page from her recipe journal. The words Le Jardin, 2018, stared up at them like a ghost from Clara's past. Lily's eyes were wide, her mouth open, but before she could say anything, Clara snatched the page back, stuffing it into her pocket. Lily, please, Clara whispered, her voice trembling. Don't tell anyone. Lily blinked, confused but curious. Clara, were you a chef at Le Jardin? That's like super famous. Clara's face tightened. It's not what you think. Just don't say anything, okay? Her voice was sharp, almost desperate. Lily nodded slowly, but her eyes followed Clara, full of wonder and suspicion. The clock ticked louder, now 2 hours, until the mayor's dinner. Clara forced herself to focus, pushing the fear of her secret being exposed to the back of her mind. The missing truffle oil was still a problem. Without it, the risotto would be bland, and Chef Roland would have her head. She scanned the kitchen, her mind racing for a solution. The staff watched her, some with pity, others with smirks, thinking she was doomed. Mike, the line cook who'd mocked her earlier, leaned against a counter, twirling a spoon. Still no truffle oil, huh? He said loud enough for others to hear. Guess you're gonna flop, newbie. Clara's stomach twisted. She was almost sure now Mike had hidden the oil to make her fail. But why? Was he just mean, or was there something bigger going on? She didn't have time to figure it out. She needed to act. Taking a deep breath, Clara remembered a trick from her old days at Les Jardins. Truffle oil wasn't the only way to get that rich, earthy flavor. She grabbed a small jar of dried porcini mushrooms from the pantry, her hands moving with a confidence that surprised even her. She soaked them in warm water, the scent filling the air like a promise. The staff noticed, their whispers growing curious again. She's using mushrooms? One cook muttered. That's not in Roland's recipe. She's gonna mess it up, another said, but their tone was less certain now. Clara ignored them, her focus razor sharp. She started the risotto, stirring the rice with precision, her movements almost like a dance. The duck was already roasting, its skin crisping to a perfect golden brown. She juiced the oranges, her hands steady despite the chaos around her. For a moment, she wasn't Clara the assistant, she was Clara the chef, the one who'd once made critics cry with a single bite. But the peace didn't last. Chef Roland stormed back into the kitchen, his eyes narrowing as he saw Clara working. "What's this?" he barked, pointing at the porcini mushrooms. "You're changing my recipe? Who do you think you are?" Clara froze, her spoon mid-stir. "The truffle oil was gone," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm improvising." "Improvising?" Roland's face turned red again. "This is my kitchen. You don't improvise unless I say so." He leaned closer, his voice a low growl. "You're trying to make a fool of me, aren't you?" "No, sir," Clara said, meeting his gaze for the first time. Her eyes held a spark of defiance, one she hadn't let out in years. "I'm trying to save the dish." The kitchen went silent. Even the clanging pot seemed to pause. Roland's mustache twitched, and for a moment it looked like he might explode. But then he laughed a cold, mocking sound. "Save it? You? Fine. Let's see you try. But if this fails, you're done. And I'll make sure everyone knows it." He turned and stormed out, leaving Clara shaking but determined. She went back to her risotto, her hands moving faster now. The porcini broth was working its rich, earthy smell was almost as good as truffle oil. Almost. But would it be enough? Lily, still watching, edged closer. "Clara," she whispered, "why are you hiding who you are? If you're from Le Jardin, you're like a superstar chef." Clara's jaw tightened. "It's complicated," she said, not looking up. "I left that life for a reason. Please, Lily, just let me do this." Lily frowned but nodded, stepping back. Clara could feel her secret unraveling, like a thread pulling loose from her carefully woven disguise. If she pulled this off, people would ask questions. If she failed, she'd lose everything. Either way, the truth was creeping closer. Then came another twist. As Clara finished the risotto, she noticed something odd about the duck. The oven temperature was wrong someone, had turned it up too high, and the skin was starting to burn. She yanked open the oven door, her heart racing. The duck wasn't ruined yet, but it was close. She adjusted the temperature, her hands shaking, and glanced around. Mike was watching her again, his smirk wider than ever. "You okay over there?" he called, his voice dripping with fake concern. Clara's eyes narrowed. This wasn't an accident. Someone was trying to sabotage her, and Mike was the prime suspect. But she didn't have proof, and she didn't have time to confront him. The mayor's guests were arriving soon, and the dish had to be perfect. She salvaged the duck, carefully slicing it to hide the slightly charred edges. Her hands moved with a speed and skill that made the staff stare. Even Mike's smirk faltered. Clara's risotto was coming together, the porcini broth giving it a deep, luxurious flavor. She plated a small sample, tasting it quickly. It was good, really good, maybe even better than Roland's recipe. But the pressure wasn't over. As Clara started preparing the orange sauce, she overheard two waiters whispering near the door. "The mayor's here early," one said, "and he brought that food critic, the one who trashed Roland's last restaurant." Clara's heart sank. A food critic? This wasn't just about saving her job anymore. If she failed, the whole restaurant could take a hit. And if she succeeded, her secret might come out in front of everyone. She glanced at her notebook, still tucked in her pocket. It held more than recipes. It held her past, her triumphs, and her failures. Should she lean on it, risk everything to make the dish perfect? Or should she play it safe, stick to Roland's rules, and hope for the best? Before she could decide, the kitchen door swung open. A waiter rushed in, his face pale. "Clara," he shouted. "The mayor's asking for the chef who's making his dish. He wants to meet you now." Clara's blood ran cold. Meet the mayor? In front of everyone? Her secret was on the verge of exploding, and she wasn't ready. She looked at the half-finished dish, then at the waiter, then at Mike, who was grinning like he'd won a prize. What was she going to do? Cliffhanger. Clara stood at the edge of disaster, her dish nearly complete but her identity hanging by a thread. The mayor's demand to meet her could expose her past, and Mike's sabotage was pushing her to the brink. Would she face the mayor and risk everything, or find a way to stay hidden while saving the dish? The kitchen waited, the clock ticking as Clara's next move hung in the balance.